Hey guys, it's Daniel TCG here. Today I've got a really OP commander. It's based on Tergrid, God of Fright, and it's essentially a sacrifice sort of deck. I'll be going through some of the best cards in there, some of the less OP cards in there, and just how it works in general, and hopefully you guys can try it out. So with this deck, I have used a more a watered down deck on a MTG Arena, as it doesn't have all the cards that we've got in the actual card game version, but this one is going to be based on trading cards rather than MTG Arena. I will be making some MTG Arena stuff, some content based on games, OP decks that I'm using, and other stuff like that. But today, this is just purely TCG, and so yeah, let's get right into it. So the commander for this deck, as I said before, is Tergrid, God of Fright. She basically has the ability of whenever an opponent sacrifices a non-token permanent or discards a permanent card, you may put that card from the graveyard to the battlefield under your control. So now this doesn't work with commanders, so if you can't get their commander, which is pretty peak in some situations, but that'd be a bit too overpowered. So she costs 2 black mana and 3 colourless, which is not too expensive. However, it can rack up if it starts going back to the commander zone. Command zone. The menace side of things is pretty good against the tokens because it forces them to block, and most of the time they are going to use tokens to block because they have to block with 2 people, well, 2 creatures. So that token sacrifice, when they do come to sacrifice the tokens, they hopefully should be dead by the menace. So this card basically makes it impossible to keep stuff. You know, opponent doesn't want to keep stuff in the hand in case you discard it, but also they want it in the battlefield in case you sacrifice it. It's perfect against stuff like Indestructible and Hexproof, as it doesn't target things really. There's even a card in there which targets the best card in their deck pretty much, well, on the battlefield, but doesn't technically say target, so we'll get to it. The only thing is, it isn't great against all tokens, because if you're creating like that many tokens where it's like, let's say like Goblin, let's say you use Kronko and you're just duplicating over and over again, they can just keep sacking off tokens. But if they are bringing out 1 or 2 tokens every time, it's not too bad. There are a few cards to counter them tokens, but for the most part it is tricky. So I'm going to go over the best cards in this deck. Now there's a few. I'm going to over the best cards, and I'm going to go over some of the creatures, and I'm going to go over some of the instants and sorceries, and so on and so on. So the number 1 card in this deck pretty much is Sheoldred Whispering One. Now it's quite an expensive card in real life. On MTG Arena it's not, well, it's just I think it's just a mythic, which is, you know, easy enough to get. But in terms of in real life, it's probably about, I think, around a £20 mark, $20 mark, I'm not sure. But 7 mana is quite expensive, but late game that's pretty easy. At the beginning of your opponent's upkeep, they must sacrifice a creature. At the beginning of your upkeep, you got to bring a creature back from the graveyard to the battlefield. It's basically one of the best to populate your board. Every single turn you're getting something back. If you get something back with an ETB, it's perfect. And then there you're getting, every single turn you're getting something essentially, which is like value central. If you can get like Lightning Greaves on this card, it's pretty much done for. The next card is Fraying Omnipotence. Now this card costs 5 mana, which is fine, as your commander costs about the same amount, so either way it's fine. So each player loses half a total life, which is fine. You know, it doesn't make too much difference, unless you're playing like a reg deck against like stuff like Shock, cards like that, where it's going to poke you down. You losing a life is going to be more sort of detrimental. Each player discards half the cards in the hand. Now, let's say if 7, they're discarding 4 cards because it's rounded up, which means you're most likely going to get a good permanent out of that. Everyone also has to sacrifice half their creatures, so if you're facing against 2 or 3 people, like, you're just getting so... This deck is better the more people you go against. However, then people are probably going to target you because this deck is that insane. If you use Fraying Omnipotence in the right moment, let's say if you've got something like Blood Artist, you'll get a lot of triggers. So this deck is like perfect for like triggers in terms of things leaving the battlefield. If you there's a card in there later which literally just 1 damage, 1 damage, 1 damage, 1 damage, 1 damage, like in like a board wipe. It's pretty nuts. You get the same amount of creatures anyway back, so it's not, you know, it's not too much of a loss for you if you start sacking off creatures. But yeah, this card rounds up, so be mindful. If you have an odd amount of cards, you'll lose the most, and if they have even, they're going to lose. So let's say if you have 5 cards in your hand, you're losing 3. They're 4, they're losing 2. Yes, it's not too bad because you get them cards. Well, not necessarily if it's an instant sorcery, but most of the time it's okay. The next card is Death Cloud. Death Cloud is probably the best card in this deck by a considerable amount. It's ridiculous. So even if you do it like mid game, so what this card does, it's an X value card, and it means X is equal to everyone losing life, everyone discarding cards, everyone sacrificing creatures, everyone sacrificing lands. So this means you're getting, let's say if you face against like 2 people, you've got 3 people there in total in the game. Everyone let's say X is 2. You're just only losing 2 life. Everyone else loses 2 life. Everyone's discarded 2 cards. Everyone's discarding 2 creatures. You get 4 creatures, and then you sacrifice 2 land. You get 4 in return. You're basically ramping up your deck for free. Essentially, it's ridiculous how much value you get from this deck. The next card is another one similar to Death Cloud. However, it's like a choice thing. So, Torment of Hellfire. It's definitely a better later game card, as it can make more impact. So let's say if you do X equals, it's another X one, and if you can do X equals 1, then they're only going to take the 3 damage, and it's not going to be worth it. You've lost one of the best cards in your deck for 3 damage. You want it to do it as late as possible, really, to end the game. They can sacrifice enchantments as well, which also helps. You want to get them enchantments. That's the one thing you want to catch them out with. If you can get an enchantment, that's just nuts. If late game is equal to 10, they don't sacrifice, then it's like, let's say like late game is equal to 10, let's say. They're taking 30 damage, which is, it's game winning. So that's why you want to do it as late as possible. The next card is one of the best cards in the deck. It is Smallpox. So it's best for getting out early game straight after your commander is out. It's perfect if you want like Dark Ritual to pull out a commander. It's basically a free cost card, because what's happening is it costs 2 mana and makes each player lose 1 life, which is a minor. Discards a card, sacrifices a creature, and sacrifices a land. So let's say if you face against 2 people, you're sacrificing mana, but you're getting 2 land back. So it's pretty much ramping your deck. Like, these sacrificing cards are also ramping your deck, which is pretty cool. And obviously that then land will come under untapped if it's a basic land. The next card is Butcher of Malakir. This guy's a 5/4 flyer, which is dangerous itself, but it does cost 7 mana. Whenever a creature dies, each opponent must sacrifice a creature. So there's other ways in which we can sacrifice our own creatures when this card's out. So if you have a death trigger blocker, it's perfect, you know. This card basically doubles the values of cards which make each player sacrifice. Because let's say if you do the sacrifice, each player sacrifices a creature, you're sacrificing 1, everyone else is sacrificing 2. It's perfect. So Sir Conrad the Grim, another great card in this deck. Basically says whenever a creature card is put into the graveyard, exits the graveyard, pretty much anything like that, it does 1 damage to target opponent, which is pretty cool. You can also make each player mill a card for 2. So let's say if you both mill a card, they're both creatures, that's 2 damage coming right at them. But it does get a little bit techie, because if, let's say, someone was to exile your graveyard, you can just, and you've got those creatures in there, if it's stacked, it's technically leaving the graveyard, so it's dealing a whole lot of damage. Let's say if you've got like a Blood Artist as well, that's a lot more triggers there. You could do stuff like with Graveyard Recursion. So let's say Rise of the Dark Realms isn't in my deck at the moment, but you could add it in, and that would do a lot of Sir Conrad triggers. So we've moved away from the main cards. There's a few main cards in, but they're like the main ones, my favourite ones to use. I want to go over creatures with death triggers. So this Blood Artist, probably the best death trigger card in this deck. So whenever a creature dies or Blood Artist dies itself, you gain a life and target opponent loses life. So if like a board wipe, it's almost game over. Malakir Coolblade. So although it's not a death trigger on itself, but whenever an opponent's creature dies, you put a +1/+1 counter on him. Nice card to get out early, just try not to block, because he'll be pretty good late game. There's Morbid Opportunist, so whenever one or more creature dies, draw a card, however only triggers once a turn. So it's a pretty overlooked card in this deck, but it just allows us more card draw, which we don't have a lot of in this deck, I can't lie. Sangromancer, a pretty nice card actually. A nice life gain card in this deck, because we don't have a huge lot of lifelink either, really. It's a 3/3 flyer. Basically says whenever a creature dies, you may gain life, or whenever an opponent discards a card, you may gain life. So it works well with stuff like Smallpox or fraying opponents early game, just because you're gaining so much life from that. Serrated Scorpion. Now, Straight Scorpion is a 1 mana thing. I always seem to poison my first hand. Now, it's honestly one of my favourite cards in the deck. For 1 mana, you're getting a 1/2, which when it dies, it deals 2 damage to each opponent and you gain 2 life. But it has like, this is where it gets like mad, because it's 1 mana, but it's got like the most value in any card in this deck pretty much. So early game, people don't seem to block it because, you know, they just think, oh, it's 1 damage. So then let's say by this time they've took around 2 or 3 damage from this one card. By the time this card's died, it's probably dealt around 5 damage and you've gained like 2 life. And then getting it back out on the battlefield later on, it's just more value. Like 2 mana for another 5 damage, I'd say. Probably won't do 5 damage later on, but you know. Next creature is sort of a death trigger. Could go in the ETB section as well, but I put in death trigger on because I like the card draw. It's Bottomless Pit. I don't know if I pronounced that right. Someone let me know, please. But this is just a college card, a solid card in general. It's 4 mana, yes, but it allows you to search your library for a basic land, put onto battlefield tapped, ramp, and it also allows for card draw when it dies. So you can just use it for a blocker, or you can just fling this about. I love the actual the premise of Bottomless Pit. He's just, I feel like you can just do whatever with him. He's just a throwaway card that does a lot for you. The next card can get a little bit techie, so it's the Haunt of Hightower. It's a pretty good card actually. So flying life, link of 3/3 for 6 mana is okay. It's not awful. However, when he attacks, defending player must discard a card. Now, whenever a card is put into the opponent's graveyard from anywhere, it gets a +1/+1. So whenever he attacks, he's at least doing like, well, he's at least a 4/4, unless that opponent has no cards in their hand. So this can build up pretty fast and win you the game. It's a flying lifelinker. I want to set up a scenario. Let's say you have this card out already from the turn before. You have enough creatures to sack off yourself. If you use something like Death Cloud with the X value of something like 5, so opponent has to like sack 5 cards, 5 lands, 5 creatures. That's like 15 cards in the graveyard, and double that if you have another opponent, and so on, so on. But you get all them cards, so you're getting at least like an 18 flying lifelinker, and the value from that for 6 mana in return is pretty decent, to be honest. Even if your opponent, let's say, uses an instant or sorcery too, that's another +1/+1. So it's, the value is. Other cards I'm not really going to go over too much, but worth a mention are Turak, Drow Counter, Zulaport, Cutthroat, Doomed Dissenter, Slaughter Specialist, and Pitiless Plunderer. All have their own places in the deck. Now, moving on to creatures of ETBs, I'm not going to go over these too much, but we've got Burglar Rat, Plague Crafter, Merciless Executioner, Demon's Disciple, Elderfang Disciple, and Fleshbag Marauder. So these cards are pretty much either discarding or sacrificing on entering battlefield. Pretty decent. You can even sack themselves, get them back later on, sack them again, get them back later on. These cards don't have ETBs or death triggers necessarily, but do have like constant discarding and sacrificing. So there's Archfiend of Spite, Cunning Lethemancer, Demon of Loathing, Hypnotic Scepter, Spectre, and Necrogoyf, I want to say. I don't know. A few fillers, I guess. There's Sanitarium Skeleton, which just returns it to your hand. So if you have to discard a card, you can just get it straight back again, discard the card. He's a bit of a throwaway, to be honest. You can also sack him off and then get him back. It's a resourceful card, to be honest. You actually end up getting quite a lot of value out of it. Then there's Typhoid Rats, which is just a good Death Toucher. You always want a Death Toucher in a black deck, really. It just stops your opponents from swinging out for free. So, moving on to sorceries. We've got some Graveyard Recursion in Blood Beckoning, Crawl from the Cellar, Forever Young, and Raised Dead. Just solid cards. Can't go wrong with a bit of Diabolic Tutor, trying to get a tutor card on a budget. That's what I go for. I don't really have the budget for like all these other tutor cards, which can be quite pricey. We always need some enchantment removal, so we've got Feed the Swarm. It's worth losing a life if you have enchantment, which is causing your deck to like stagnate. So you don't mind taking like 3 life for like, I don't know, a Ghostly Prison or something. I think Ghostly Prison's 3 mana. Next up, we've got Zoth Consumption. It's a bit of a random one, but you can gain life and make opponents' life lose life, 4 to be exact, which is pretty good, but to be honest, I mainly use this card for the land. It's only when I really need it I actually use it for the other side. Sacrificing sorceries, there's Barter in Blood. So this one is quite good in situations, but I don't use that too much before my commander's out. If you have cards with death triggers, use it, but I'd say use it on your go before you get your commander out to stop it from getting killed straight away by, let's say, like a Death Touch or anything. Just because it makes you sacrifice 2 creatures, which if you don't have the creatures out, if it's not late game, it's pretty useless, to be honest. You don't really want to be sacking your creatures for no reason. There's Innocent Blood and My Own Misery. So a discarding sorcery is bad deal. Now this card is pretty good. You draw 2 cards, opponent discards 2 cards, and each player loses 2 life. So you draw into, and your opponents are discarding 2, so you can get them 2 cards, possibly if they're permanent. Duress or Duress, not sure how you say it, but this card is really good in like first hand or early on, just before you get your commander out. As you can see, their hand for 1 mana, and see if there's any destroy spells, because although you can use it and like discard a card and get that card back, your planeswalker, your commander is the one thing you want to protect. So by seeing their hand, you know that even if it's the go after you get your commander out, they're probably not going to have a destroy type creature hand in a spell. Spell in the hand. There's Mind Rot, No Way Out. No Way Out's pretty good because it's better than Mind Rot because they just both discard 2 cards. But this one you create a 2/2 zombie token with decaying, which is more resourceful, I guess, but because it's commander, you can have 1 card of each. Siphon Mind, 2 Rax Canticle. Moving on to artifacts. Now for ramping, we've got Charcoal Diamond and Soul Ring. Charcoal Diamond just adds a black mana, good for getting out early, pretty useless in the late game. But Soul Ring, always good in any deck. Now, important, ramping any mana. Now, this is important because if you get, let's say, a white creature or a blue creature, anything that has like a, let's say you have an active on it that you can activate with the with a creature, let's say, and you only have black mana, it doesn't state that you can't use any mana to cast it, which means you're going to have to use the mana there. So if you get these out, you can, I mean, there still might be actives that you can't use because it's too much mana, but a lot of the time you're going to be able to use them a lot more frequently. So these artifacts are Felwar Stone and Gilded Lotus. There's also Prismatic Lens. Now, we always need to protect our commander, so these cards that I've put in are Lightning Greaves and Swiftfoot Boots. Essential. Other artifacts that are a little bit more just out there, we've got Guest Grimoire. Don't know if I've butchered that. But whenever opponent discards a card, you may draw a card. It just helps get that card draw because it's not that much in there. There is the next one, which is a little bit unnecessary in the deck. Now, you can take it out, put Rise of Dark Realms in or something like that. There's loads of stuff we can do. So, I sort of just added it for fun. Now, it gives a +2/+0 and Death Touch. So, putting on Tergrid with Menace is pretty decent. Now, it is quite a good card against something like Lifelink. Just because if they've got a crazy high life total in the late game but don't have many creatures out, after sacrificing, you can activate its ability for 8 mana, your opponents be forced to block, or they lose the game. So with Menace, let's say they have a creature and you have 1 creature out, you attack with Tergrid with Menace and the activated ability, which makes them lose the game. Now, moving on to instants. The best card for getting the commander out early is Dark Ritual. Now, everyone knows this card, don't have to go into it. The next set of ones I'm just going to go over, which are just some removal spells. We've got Defenestrate, Eliminate, Finishing Blow, and Murder. The Sacrifice and instants, we've got Vona's Hunger, Sudden Addict, Soul Shatterer, which, unlike the others, this is the one which makes them get rid of the highest mana costing creature. So it's pretty good for getting rid of them hexproof creatures. Let's say if they've put a Lightning Greaves on the commander, it's just easier to get rid of it. We've got Liliana's Triumph. Decent if you have Liliana out as well, which we do have one in the deck, which I will go over later. It makes them discard a card if we control Liliana as well. Moving on to enchantments, we've got Bottomless Pit. Now this card can screw you over a little bit, as every player discards a card at random on all the upkeeps, not at their upkeep, sorry. So maybe use this late game when you've got a bit more of a control of the game, and when you sort of, you know, you'll have the mana to play your best cards. We have Eternal Thirst. We have Underworld Dreams, which is pretty good against mill decks. It just stops players in general trying to outdraw you to find their best cards and win before you can. And my favourite enchantment is Revel in Riches. Now, this card is one of the most underrated cards in this deck. It's quite pricey. It's about £20, maybe not, maybe about £10, £20. But it's so easy to win the game with this deck. If your opponents don't have enchantment removal, whether you swing out on kill creatures or sacrifice them, every time an opponent's creature dies, you get a treasure token. And it includes if 2 other opponents attacking each other as well. So this card is useful to get stuff out with mana, if you want to use the treasure tokens, or you can let them build up and win the game from getting 10 or more. It's a pretty good distraction away from Tergrid. So to keep your commander alive, use Reveling Riches, because they're going to want to focus on enchantment rather than your commander. The only downside is it that I'd say is that it makes you sort of become the biggest threat. Everyone's going to be focusing on you, trying to get you out before that thing can pop off, essentially. So maybe having a Death Toucher with this enchantment out is a pretty good idea, because they're not going to want to swing at you and get your life total down. They're going to have to get like a disenchant or something. Just make sure you're well equipped to deal with the onslaught. For the only Planeswalker in this deck, I've got Liliana, Waker of the Dead. So it's +1, makes everyone discard a card. So again, a lot of value out of that. You're getting a lot of cards which work with discarding cards. It's perfect. It also takes, again, a lot of the distraction away from Tergrid by having a Planeswalker. Its -3 isn't too bad as well, because you can kill off a creature. It's -7 as an emblem, which at the beginning of combat on your turn, put a creature onto the battlefield from the graveyard and give it haste. So it's good for like ETBs or death triggers. Moving on to land in this deck, I've gone for 26 normal swamp, 1 Phyrexian Tower, and 1 Radiant Fountain. You can't ever go wrong. So that's the deck, ladies and gentlemen. Hope you enjoyed. Please leave a like and comment, subscribe if you did, and more content coming soon.